Great. So, okay. All right, so today we're going to talk about what are some high impact evidence-based practices when providing literacy instruction for students who are English learners. And so there's actually a growing body of research about this information and what we know are best practices when we're teaching students who are English learners. And so if you're just joining, welcome. And I would like for everyone to grab a piece of paper and something to write with and take just a minute to reflect on what are some strategies that you already implement or that you already know of when it comes to teaching English learners. Also, take a minute and type in the chat for me. How prepared do you currently feel to teach your students? And what are some of the concerns that you may have when it comes to preparing for teaching your students this semester, this year? All right.
Hello. Shay? Yes.
Oh. Okay, here we go. Feeling pretty comfortable, feeling prepared, running out of material. Oh yeah, I can relate to that. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being vulnerable and putting your concerns in the chat. Okay. Yeah, thinking about how much education they've had, background knowledge, better ways to communicate. Okay, that's a really interesting question about using the alphabet. Does their native language use our alphabet? Everyone participates equally. Okay. These are some really valid and great concerns and legitimate concerns as teachers. And goodness, for just 1 hour, so there's so much that I would love to share. But so there is a growing body of evidence and a growing body of research on what are best practices. And really, what I always like to go and start off with are what we know are principles of effective instruction in general. And these are guiding principles that we know that make a higher quality teacher and really have positive academic outcomes for students when they implement those things. So a few of them are, so I didn't make a slide of them, but explicit instruction, so being very clear in the way that you deliver the material and really modeling the skill or the concept that we're trying to teach. Systematic instructions are going from simple to more complex concepts. The third is giving plenty of opportunities for students to respond. And so in a nutshell, what that really means is making sure that we have more student engagement and less of the teacher talking, and giving the students more opportunity to engage with the material themselves. And then providing positive and concrete feedback. So making sure that when a student makes an error, we don't allow them to continue making that same error, so they're practicing something incorrectly, but we're really modeling and giving the appropriate feedback so that they know what it is that we are trying, what is the skill that we're trying to teach them or to encourage, right? So providing that modeling once more, that is just so key when working with students, both who are English learners, and second, students with disabilities and with significant needs. That's also very key. All right, so I'm going to jump right into some suggestions. I've got 11 suggestions and tips, or strategies. I guess they're not suggestions. 11 strategies that have evidence behind them that we know work with students who are English learners. So the first one is, it's a really big one, and it's one that probably a lot of you have heard or are already implementing, and that is when you're providing instruction to English learners, you really want to make things visual. Now, that doesn't always mean just providing a picture. When we say make things visual, that also encompasses when you give directions for activities and when you're asking the students to do something. It's really helpful and important to write the directions for the activity, have them written somewhere. Think about when you're learning something new, particularly a new language, and the instructor is giving you instructions to do something in English, and you've never spoken English before. And so your cognitive load is so huge, because not only are you trying to remember what you're supposed to do for the activity, but you're also trying to process and understand the language that's being communicated to you. So writing directions down is really helpful in those situations. A second strategy is to really model what you are asking the students to do. Don't make assumptions that they understand what that direction is that you're giving them. For example, an example that I heard from one of the teachers that I worked with once is that she was new. She had a new group of students. She went into the classroom, and the direction she gave her students was, copy this off of the board. And the students just sat there and they looked at her. Well, they had no idea what the word copy meant. So making that assumption that they knew, she was giving them a directive and she was asking them to copy something off the board, but she made that assumption that they had done that before and they knew what that meant. So just modeling and really being explicit and intentional about what you're asking the students to do can go a long way. And then also, now this is the one that you probably most often think of when you think about making it visual, is really including images for new vocabulary. And that also really does go a long way as well. It helps with comprehension and it helps the students really understand what you're talking about. So anytime I do like an activity or a workshop, I really like to have it be interactive, and I really like us to practice what we're learning. So I would like you to take a minute and let's pretend that you're going over a passage with the students, a paragraph or a few paragraphs that talks about summertime in Dallas, right? So what are some common things or activities that take place during the summer in Dallas? And so I want you to take a step back and really think about what are some visuals that you can provide to help build meaning in this context. And then a step even further, what is something that you can do in a context like this to really incorporate some of the culturally responsive practices that we talked about in my earlier session? So I'm going to give everybody about a minute to really think about this and maybe write a few things down. And then I would really love for you to share if you are comfortable and talk about what are some of the things that you may want to, what are some visuals and what's a way to extend and incorporate culturally responsive teaching? Okay. So go ahead, and if anyone wants to if you feel more comfortable putting it in the chat, that's fine. If you feel comfortable, sharing with the group out loud, please feel free to unmute yourself. And I would love to hear first, number one, so what are some visuals that may help and building meaning? What's some visuals that you may want to provide?
Swimming.
Go ahead.
Swimming.
Swimming. So yeah, that's wonderful. Swimming. So can you be more specific for me? So swimming where?
At, say, a local swimming pool that may be in the community, at a community center.
Yeah, exactly. That is definitely something that I remember doing when my boys were younger, taking them to the community pool, having them go swimming. They had tons of fun. So yeah, that's something. And providing that visual, because swimming right in a community pool may look very different than what swimming looked like for some of the students that may be in your classroom. So definitely great example. Any other examples?
Yeah, so just to show pictures like of swimming or whatever. Also you can pantomime things, even on Zoom, they can see you doing it. And talk about things that we do here in summer and ask them what they do in summer. What are some of the things that they think about when they think about summer?
Exactly. That's a great suggestion. That's right. And so it's not just images, but we can act things out, pantomime, just like you said. That also goes a long way as well. That's very helpful. It makes me smile because my son recently had a sore throat, and so to communicate, that's exactly what he did. He would point at things and act things out, and so it really does. It's helpful in helping understand and communicating a concept.
One of the things Karen and I have done, because of our internationally representation in our class, which we like the diversity a lot. We have asked them at different holidays of the year to personally tell us what are some of the things their tradition has done, either at Christmas, and they have put pictures up on the screen of some of the most beautiful images from their own homes, from their countries. And this way, our students from Russia or Turkey or South America or Mexico or wherever, it's a learning for them to not only share, but to understand some of these wonderful traditions.
Definitely. That is great. And see, I love this. That's why I love the interaction and the collaboration with the small groups, because we can really learn from one another with what works in our different classrooms. I love that.
Yeah, and I was going to say my class is it's 1C, and so it is still limited as far as our ability to communicate a whole lot. I mean, I would just draw a sun and I would act out being really hot. And one of the things that has helped is to show the different seasons, to explain how it feels and the months of the year. And then ask them, just real basic for my class.
But that's a great suggestion, and it really is helpful. It really is helpful in helping them understand and process and put an image to what you're talking about. So like we said before, really linking that background knowledge to new concepts is really what makes those neurons fire. It really helps build comprehension. It helps us to remember the concepts that we're learning. So that's wonderful. Awesome. So the next strategy, thank you for those who shared. So the next strategy that we really want to be intentional about and we really want to think about is really being on the lookout for unique vocabulary and phrases. So things that to us are so extremely common and normal, but they might be completely foreign or completely new to someone who hasn't had the same background experiences that we have. So for example, what does it mean to toss a pizza? Or, when we say, oh, that's so cool, or that's cool, what does that mean? That can have several meanings in the English language itself. So really thinking about that unique vocabulary and trying not to use it, or when we do use it, really explaining what it means. Another one is a faucet. That is, we have faucets. Almost everyone in the United States has a faucet in their house. We know that, that's where the water comes out in our sink and, wherever. So, but that might not necessarily be common knowledge to someone who is not from here, who hasn't had those experiences, or they call it something, completely different and they wouldn't know. What does it mean to feel antsy? So that's a phrase, oh, when our children are being antsy or they're not able to sit still, or even thinking about or saying the phrase, oh, you're counting your Benjamins, those are all things that are culturally unique to our culture, to our region. So really being on the lookout for those phrases. And when we do use those phrases, making sure that we explain what we mean by them. The next suggestion is to check for understanding. And so this model, this Freyer model is really, it's evidence-based. We use it all the time for our students with learning disabilities when it comes to really understanding and teaching vocabulary. And so what you do when you use the Freyer model is the students break their piece of paper, they notate their piece of paper. You can fold it, you can just put, a vertical line and a horizontal line, however you want to do it. And then you fill in each of these boxes for that vocabulary word that you have. So you want, in the one box, you're going to put what is the meaning of that word in your own words, or that phrase or that concept. What is the meaning in your own words? Next, you draw a picture of it. So what does it look like? Draw a picture. What is an example? And then what is a non-example? So we use this all the time in our classrooms for teaching English learners and for teaching students with learning disabilities. So let's practice. So take a minute. And what does racing mean? When you're racing, what does that mean? So I would like for you to go ahead and practice this on your sheet of paper. So, and build yourself a little T. And then what is the meaning in your own words? Draw a little picture and then give me an example and a non-example. And take 30 more seconds. Okay, so does anybody feel comfortable sharing what is the meaning that they put down? So what is the meaning in their own words? So what does racing mean?
I said going fast as my own meaning.
Okay, I like that, going fast. And what did you draw a picture of, Nancy?
I drew a picture, well, a really bad picture, but it was supposed to be of someone running a race. So running.
Wonderful. Yeah. So really by just taking a look at that, oh, and someone moving fast or trying to win. Yeah. And so this is also a way that you as an instructor can really check for understanding when you are explaining a concept to your student. You know, maybe you don't ask them to share, you know, with the whole group, but you can even walk around the room if you're doing in person, and really take a look at, you know, if they're really understanding what it is that you are explaining or what that vocabulary word is. And it really helps the students to really internalize and process the concept or the vocabulary word. Wonderful. All right, so let us move.
Can you give an example of non-example? That was harder to come up with, but I mean, I came up with something, but
That was
Yeah,
hard
so-
for me as well.
That one is always tricky, but so for this one, I chose racing because I immediately thought of, well, what's not racing? Okay, sleeping. So someone who's sleeping is not racing. So something like that.
okay, thank you.
Well, I showed him sitting, but for the example, my example was the same as the picture I drew. That's where I thought it.
Yeah, and that's fine. And it doesn't have to be, you know, an example could be that, you know, the same thing as a definition, or it could be an example of maybe a specific race, or there's, you know, it's flexible. There isn't a hard fast rule for exactly, you know, what needs to go in each section. So that's flexible.
Well, and you said you don't necessarily have to share in class, but the idea of sharing, I mean, something like racing can have so many different meanings depending on the context. So, you know, everybody could have a different meaning, but they might all be right. So
That's true. Definitely.
I said contest for speed,
There you go.
but I should mention that I got that meaning from the Fort Worth police as a teenager.
Well, hey, you know, that it's still the meaning that works. All right. So the next strategy that I would like to highlight and to really think about is limiting the use of figurative language. And this is a big one. So my husband would kill me if he heard all these things I was saying about him. So exactly, there you go, figurative language, right there. So really limiting the things that you say that could have a different meaning. Some students take a lot of the figurative language that you say very literally. And so you need to explain when you use a term that is using figurative language, be making sure that you explain what you mean. Okay, sorry, I just got a signal that my internet connection was a little unstable, so I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. For example, I was talking last night about how someone that I was sitting with at a table in a conference here, I'm at a conference right now currently, made a joke while we were supposed to be sitting in a session. And so I told my husband out loud, I said, oh, and I almost died laughing. And my son kind of just looked at me and he goes, "You almost died?" Like very, so the things that we say can have very different meanings to different people. And that when we use that figurative language, we just need to make sure that we explain exactly what we mean. So I had to explain, oh, that's just something that people say. It doesn't mean I didn't really die. It just meant, that, I thought it was very funny and I was trying not to laugh. So, it's really important to just to think about that, because some of us, it just naturally comes out. We just naturally say terms like that in phrases. So what are some phrases that you probably have heard often, or maybe something that you say often? And so I would like for you guys to think about that and keep a list to kind of help you check yourself. Right, to help you check yourself and help you think about what are some of the things that you typically say that maybe I should think about this, because it doesn't always have the meaning that I'm intending it to have. Does anybody feel comfortable sharing? Or if you don't want to, you can just write it down on your list or put it in the chat.
I tend to use down a rabbit hole pretty often. I don't want to say, like whenever I have a teachable moment and I go off on a tangent, I'll say, oh, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, and they're all just like blank face.
Yeah. What does that mean? Yeah, that's a great one. That is a great example. Thank you for sharing, David. Yeah, just really, so what do you do then? Do you explain to them what it means, or?
Yeah, I've actually, this isn't my idea, but I got it from another place I volunteer here in Austin, where they have professional educators and the volunteers just help out. But they did an idiom of the day, beginning of every class. And I began to realize that so much of our language is idioms that I incorporated it into my class. And so now I do an idiom of the day, just, pull it out of a hat. And so, I love that. Idiom.
We used to do that too as a part of the curriculum, but that went away after about a year. Sometimes the material though includes idioms, and that's always interesting. I'm thinking of one page that focuses on people who are sick and tired, and so we always ask at the beginning of the class, what does that mean? And people think, they think it's literal. They're sick or they're tired or both. And so we have to explain that. But
great, I love it. I love this learning from one another, and that's great. Anything else? Anyone else want to share? Ooh, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Jody, I saw your comment. Is that at West in person? I don't see it on our curriculum.
Oh, sorry. No, it's at Elm, and it's posted on the bulletin board in each class.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, because I know there's several Elm teachers in this meeting, and I just wanted to make you aware of it, because feel free to point that out to your students. It's also a good thing to go to, and I'm not trying to take over, but if you have extra time in class, you can use that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And, really a way to also bring that culturally responsive piece into it is thinking about what are some of the phrases and idioms that other cultures use, or things that they say. Even though I'm fluent in Spanish, there are still some phrases that when either a family member or a friend says it, I'm like, what does that mean? What, can you explain that to me? So really understanding and hearing from other cultures as well would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we get enough time to go through everything and have a few minutes for questions. So I'm going to move to the next strategy. And so really what we know in the research is that bringing in group work and discussion has a lot of evidence behind it when it comes to increasing academic outcomes of students. So thinking about it, less time that you are doing a teacher-led whole group instruction means that students are being, so if you're talking less, that hopefully that means that the students are being more engaged, right? So we want to give them those opportunities to work together and to have that small group discussion. And another reason why it's really helpful and beneficial is because a lot of times conversations that are peer-to-peer conversations, students feel like are lower stakes, right? They're not as high stakes as sharing in front of the whole class and sharing with the teacher, but they feel a little bit more comfortable practicing and having those conversations with their peers before sharing with the whole group. So it also builds that confidence and allows them to practice in a lower stakes context. So I know that there were some concerns that were put in the chat and that some people shared about making sure all of the students got a chance to say something in practice. But I also don't want us to forget that there is sometimes in a period of a silent period, right? Where students are really just taking a step back and really observing and learning and taking things in. So even though we do want to encourage engagement and encourage interaction, but we also don't want to force students to speak if they don't want to or if they're not ready to. There are some cultures where before you speak, you really need to know what you're going to say and it has to be perfect. And so really being sensitive to that and taking that into account when we're asking our students to participate. But the opposite of that, right, is making sure that we're not calling on the same students all the time so that we are giving the other students an opportunity to try, but not forcing them if they don't want to. So very interesting, David, about the peer-to-peer breakout rooms. So I find that when you're doing something like that, you really need it to be structured, number one, and have a really explicit set of goals and outcomes. So even saying, hey, we're going to do this breakout, you know, peer to peer, and I want you to practice this. And then when we come back to the whole group, this is what I want, you know, each group to share, or this is the product that is going to come out of that. And it doesn't need to be something physical like an assignment or something, but just so that there's some sort of accountability. Or another way around that is to really take a few minutes but it's more time intensive, right? To go from room to room and spend a little bit of time with each. But so those were just some of the suggestions that I would say.
That was actually my plan, to go from room to room, and I just had them talking about a topic and, you know, coming back. And what I did is my strongest students I put with a strong student, I put with a weaker student. But it was a technological disaster, is what I meant.
Oh no.
You can't use breakout rooms unless you have the paid version of Zoom. And the only time I use the paid version is when I'm teaching. And so I can't really log on and practice it because I'll get in with another class. Anyway, now I'm going down a rabbit hole again.
Definitely. But I feel your pain. I understand. Technology always adds another layer of complexity to everything that we do. So, but I commend you for trying. So this is a big one. So this next strategy, and it's actually a hot topic among a lot of people, but I can tell you that we do have support and a growing body of research that really supports this idea of allowing students to scaffold and allowing scaffolding with the student's native language. And so what that means is that when students are new and they're learning a new concept or just learning something new, it's okay, and it's actually beneficial to have them use their native language to fully understand it, to learn it better, right? So even pairing new students with someone who speaks their native language to kind of clarify instructions or give certain explanations, it really builds comprehension, and it promotes cultural competence, and it really is a culturally responsive practice. And I even put in a piece from a research article from 2012 that states allowing second language learners to pre-write and brainstorm in their native language, in their L1, really does result in higher quality writings when they're ready to bring it into that L2, the language that they're learning. So it really helps with that comprehension piece and helping the students understand that topic or that concept that you're trying to cover. So other than, writing or pairing students, have any of you used this way of native language in the classroom or as a scaffold, or would someone like to share? Again, I really love it when we learn from one another, so I really like to have you guys share.
I have a point. The students that I've paired together, sometimes the weaker student really doesn't learn much at all because they lean too heavily on the more advanced student, and it's really a problem. I mean, it can be very rewarding to them, but it can be very disappointing.
So one thing that I would suggest for that's a great point, and I can completely understand and see that. So well, before I give you this suggestion, I'm going to just give the statement that teaching is hard work. Teaching in general is hard work, and really sharing and planning and preparing it, it takes a lot of effort. And so what you guys are doing is so special and so important, and I really appreciate you being here and working with Literacy Achieves. So my suggestion for that, Dawn, would be maybe having a process in advance, or really thinking about in advance, what is that scaffolding procedure going to look like, right? So is it just, and what I mean by that is like putting some boundaries on it, right? Or saying, hey, you can, this is how we're going to use this. Go ahead and, explain this concept, but then we're going to come back to what we're learning, and I do want you to practice it in English. So we're using it not as we're using that native language not as a crutch, but more so as a tool.
You're frozen. She's frozen.
Hopefully she'll log out
I
and
know.
log back
Yeah.
in. So wait just a second. She
That's
just
what
logged.
she's doing. Yeah,
Yes. She logged out. Let's see if she can get back in.
this is really helpful.
It is. I'm really enjoying it.
It's one of the better ones, really is.
Yeah, she is great. I feel lucky we got her. Also, what I'm going to quickly say, I told this to David, but everybody is welcome to log in and use our Zoom to practice. anytime there's not a class going on. So best bet for that though, because we have morning classes from 9 to 11, 12:30 to 2. Anyways, weekends and Fridays are a good time.
How about the middle of the night?
The middle of the night, we're wide open. You can go crazy.
Jody, are the different, are the morning, is there a different link, I guess, to Zoom for the morning classes versus the afternoon classes?
No, there's
it's all the
not.
same?
Yeah,
Okay.
they use the same. Now we do have, if you really need to practice in the morning, get with Laura, because there are a couple of classes, like we might have 2 sessions, we might have 2 level Cs in the afternoon, but only 1 in the morning. So one of those classes, we might be able to, what I'm saying is we might be able to find you an open classroom that's not the one you're used to using, but if you really wanted to practice, you could use it.
But so 3 or later though is okay.
Yeah, 3, well, and then we have nighttime classes that start at 7. So
Okay.
yeah,
And those
as
are
long
also
as
2 hour, I guess.
they're, yeah, they
Okay, can
end.
you guys hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yes.
I am so sorry. I am at a conference, and so I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with the hotel Wi-Fi. It's not always the best, so I sincerely apologize for that. Okay, so I'm going to try to make it through the last 3 quickly. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you, Jody, for jumping right in. So the last few strategies have more to do with those principles of effective instruction that I mentioned earlier. So really being explicit in your instruction and teaching concepts overtly. Modeling what it is you mean when you're explaining something, or what it is you want the students to do, or what that product is that you want them to present. And then using that modeling for error correction. That really is so powerful. Just instead of telling them that they're wrong, just really explicitly saying, well, that is, this, or that word is not, can you say it with me? Okay, now your turn. Really just being explicit with that modeling is extremely helpful. You also want to be systematic in your instruction. So really thinking about teaching simpler concepts before the more complex concepts. And when you are doing specific like vocabulary, or let's say even to working with the younger children or teaching the alphabet, making sure that we don't teach visually similar letters or words together at the same time, because then that's so making sure that you separate those visually similar words, or words that sound the same or look the same, teaching them at different times. And then really understanding that some sounds in our lexicon don't exist in other languages. One example, and I can give examples in Spanish, just since I'm a native speaker, I wouldn't be able to speak to some of the other languages, but the TH sound, that is not a sound in Spanish. We just don't, we don't have that sound. And so when, learning that and when teaching that, it's just be sensitive to that. And it's something we really have to teach, the shape of the mouth and how to really produce that sound, where you place your tongue, because that's just not something that comes naturally. Did you want to say something to that, Janie or Karen?
No.
No,
Okay.
okay.
I was just thinking about word examples that we use with that, but that is a hard one, and it's really hard. And it's really hard to teach if you're doing it on Zoom, because I did it on Zoom, and then and even with a mask on in person, it's hard.
Oh, yes. Well, and even, I find it fascinating. So my sons are in a Spanish immersion school, so they're learning English and Spanish at the same time. And so one of the they learned Spanish actually before they learned English, and we're very intentional about that. But now my 6-year-old, I really have to be intentional with reminding him about the TH sound when he's speaking in English, because he's gotten so accustomed to the Spanish that it's something that we have to be intentional about. So yep. Another thing that is really helpful and that we know in the research supports comprehension, supports oral language and vocabulary is just simply reading to your students, right? So allowing them to hear you reading with fluency and prosody and expression really helps them to learn that new vocabulary. It helps them to learn with prosody and expression and fluency. Providing repeated reading opportunities, we know that there's a lot of evidence behind that as well. So it exposes them, like I said, to new vocabulary, and can also be turned into like an additional teaching moment or something extra that you do at the end of class when, if you have a little bit more time. You also want to be very careful when it comes to assigning independent reading for the students, not only in the classroom, but anything that they're going to be doing, at home or away from the classroom. Just making sure that if you're going to be assigning independent reading, that you make sure you design or designate time for those comprehension conversations. And giving them an opportunity, we know in the research that round robin reading, so where you say, okay, now you read this, now you read this next sentence or paragraph, there's not really a lot of evidence behind that. We do want students to have opportunities to read and to practice reading, but we just want to be very purposeful. And if we're going to have the students read out loud, then we need to be very intentional about the way we're giving feedback to those students and giving them a chance to practice and practicing our error correction with them. And then another thing we want to consider, another strategy, is really being consistent in our language. Yes, being very consistent when we give examples, and making sure that when we repeat something, we're repeating it the same way. And that we are being very clear when we're asking them or giving them an example for something. So one example that I love to give is when we say to a student, we write something or we put something up and we're like, well, which is the bigger number? Well, what do you mean? Well, 6 has a larger value, but in size, the 3 is bigger. So just being very clear, using the language, the consistent academic language that we need to be using, and explaining and being clear in our references and our examples. Okay, so we are just right out of time. So I really would like for you to take a step back and reflect a minute back on those in the beginning when we first started, and thinking about what you already know and what you already implement, and think about now, what is something new that you learned during this session? Hopefully you learned something new during this session. And what are some questions that you still have? What is something that you would like to ask about? And I'm more than happy to stay for a few minutes to answer questions. For anyone who would like to stay and ask questions, for those of you that are done or have another appointment, thank you so much for being here. I know that Ashley said that you could either join the group or whatever you need to do. So, but I would love to answer questions.
I had a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One thing that I've recommended, and maybe that this is not a good recommendation, is that the students, when we give them something to read, that they read it first by themselves. And then
That's actually a great recommendation.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that is
the thing. Then I
yes.
have to highlight or underline any words that they don't understand before we do it as a group, so that they're not just listening to other people, they're picking out the words they don't know. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation, because you're being purposeful about that independent reading, right? You have an intention behind it. You really are having them really look at that excerpt or look at that passage and identify what they know. So it's not just telling them, okay, go read. You really have a purpose, and it's intentional. So that's wonderful.
Okay, good. Thank you. I wanted to say that this was very informative. I learned quite a bit.
Oh, thank you.
I have a question related to that.
Sure.
So then when we get them to read, how
Yes.
best, because you say that the round robin really doesn't work. So what is an example? Because we do at the end of class, we have these reading stories, the stories that we have. How best to get them started reading? What is your recommendation?
I think that if you're going to have them do round robin reading, or if you're going to have them read out loud in front of everyone, then I think it's really critical to have a process that you use that is a really supportive and intentional way of giving them feedback during that reading, because that's really what we know is the key when in literacy instruction, is really making sure that we're providing that explicit corrective feedback so that they're practicing things the right way. So just making sure, so you reading along with them or following along with them, and then if they making an error, helping them fix that error immediately, but in a positive way, and then just continuing on, so that, or even if they don't make an error but they're struggling with a word, so that's another prime example. So if they get to a word that they don't know and they don't even try it, providing that support and just telling them what the word is.
Okay.
And modeling it for them. Yeah, giving them the word, that is helpful, and making sure that, and this one's a little bit more complicated, but that we're not asking students to sound out words that are what in literacy we call irregular words or sight words. And those are words that can't be sounded out. And so if we ask a student to sound out a word like want, that's the example I like to use all the time. I mean, in the English language, the A is supposed to say ah, not ah. So if we ask them to sound out the word want, we're actually, they're going to sound it out differently than how you would read it. So making sure that we know the difference between what's an irregular word and what's a decodable word, so that when we're providing that feedback, we're not asking them to do something that they shouldn't be doing in the first place.
I have one.
Thank you.
Still on the reading thing.
Sure.
The timing of the correction. I wait until they're finished and then go back and teach them how to pronounce the words they mispronounce, instead of stopping them and telling them. What's your view of which is the best way, to do it in the middle of the sentence or wait until they finish?
I can tell you that with our students, so I work quite a bit with students with dyslexia and significant disabilities. And so what we've seen in the research is that immediate feedback is the most effective, so that they can really, immediately after they've made an error in the word, correcting that error and modeling the appropriate way to read it. Now, you also need to know your students pretty well. And so if by providing that error correction, it's going to cause a whole nother disruption, and you know, then you need to balance that. But if you create an environment in the classroom where they really feel like that correction is a support and not a criticism, and that you're really just, yep, this is how you say it, you do it in a positive way, and it's more of like a scaffold rather than no, that's wrong, but just going ahead and just saying the right word. That's why that modeling is so important, instead of saying that they made an error, but just modeling the right word, like, and then just keep going. And that's what we've seen in the research that is most impactful.
Sure.
Yeah, any other questions? I really am happy to stay and answer a couple more questions before they kick us out of the breakout room.
I just wanted to say, the tools that you have given us today and all of the examples are by far the best, in my opinion, that we have ever been given. Now, I'm not saying that the other orientation through the years has not been helpful, but when you get to level 4, we really need some exciting tools. And what you gave us today, in my opinion, and I hope Karen will agree with me, these are all so usable. And I have so many pages of notes here that it's going to take me and Karen probably another 2 hours to decide how we're going to plan for our first session. But thank you so much for the time, and also for everyone else's chat and their participation. Have learned a lot today. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. You guys are amazing. I mean, you are the special ones. You're out there on the ground every day, you know, teaching and working with these students. It's amazing. So thank you.
Can I ask one more question, please?
Sure.
Okay, I teach basic, and I teach them, like, for the letter A, meaning they know the alphabetical pronunciation, but I also teach them maybe 4 other pronunciations, so that they're not blindsided by that. But is that too early at the basic level to teach them to pronounce those sounds?
That is a loaded question. So I think that it's different, because with adult learners, they have the cognitive capacity, right, to be able to handle more than children, right? They are able to kind of step back and really understand that. So what I would suggest is doing it as a continuum, right? So what I normally try to do when I'm teaching reading or teaching a student to read is that I'm going to teach you first the most common sound that these letters make. That's what we're going to focus on, and we're going to really learn what's the most common sound. Then I'm going to teach you, I'm going to come back later and I'm going to say, okay, now A can also say A when it's spelled like this, when it's spelled like this, and when it's spelled like this. So best practice is probably is definitely to teach that most common sound first. Really have them become familiar with that, because that's going to help them a lot with their decoding. But then come back and show them those patterns, the vowel patterns and letter teams, to really help them understand the way that other sounds work together to make words. And then throughout that, you always want to, and this is the like the elementary school reading teacher in me, right? That's good. That we also want to make sure that we are very clear about teaching at, there's a lot of words in the English language that, you know, like I tell my kids, you know, they don't follow the rules. They just don't. And so you have to practice them just by sight. We have a lot of irregular words. So it's a lot of different components that are coming into one, right, to teaching reading and teaching English. And so I feel like I'm talking a whole lot to answer your question, but my suggestion would be to start with the most common sound first, and then come back around and teach those other patterns. And you can teach those as a group, but start with the most common sound first.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate being a part of this group. I'm so happy to be here and share with you and be able to help. And I'm excited to see the outcomes of this year and talk to Sarah and Ashley about how the students are doing. And best of luck to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank